Now, the most watched news in the Panhandle. News Channel 10, News at 10.
Authorities may have zeroed in on a suspect in a shooting at this location, but there are others recently where they could still use your tips. We'll remind you of those acts of violence coming up on the News at 10. A suspect is in custody in connection with a fatal shooting last week in Amarillo.
News Channel 10's Heather Geller spoke with police on the arrest and has more on why murder charges have not been filed.
Jared Jones was arrested earlier this week on warrants for felon in possession of a firearm and tampering with evidence. Police say these warrants were issued as a result of Jones's involvement in Matthew Guzman's death. Guzman was found by police officers August 5th in an apartment on Virginia with a gunshot wound to his upper body. Guzman later died at the hospital.
So that's where we are right now in the case. Obviously, we're not done investigating it, but this is a good start.
Although no murder charges have yet to be filed in the shooting that took place here, Special Crimes tells us they're still investigating this case.
We know that he was present during the incident, but trying to determine his exact involvement is what we're working on now. And so as we're able to, as details become available and we can divulge them, we'll certainly let everybody know.
Lieutenant Bohannon would not comment as to whether they believe another person is involved in Guzman's death or if Jones is the only suspect.
Right now, we're not at a point where we can say that we have no probable cause to get a murder warrant.
Special Crimes is still looking for help in this case. If you have any information, call 378-9468. Heather Geller, News Channel 10.
Well, the hunt continues for a fugitive wanted for murder in our area. 27-year-old Jessica Medina has a warrant out of Randall County for bond surrender stemming from charges of murder and aggravated robbery. She is 5 feet tall and about 170 pounds. If you have any information that could lead police to an arrest, call Amarillo Crime Stoppers at 374-4400. The hunt also continues for suspects in connection with a fatal shooting in our area over 2 months ago. On June 12th, an Alva, Oklahoma man was shot to death in the parking lot of the Loaf and Jug in Boise City. Officials are still searching for the shooter as well as possible witnesses to the crime. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigations has offered a $5,000 reward for any help solving this crime. That number is 1-800-522-8017.
Monday evening's homicide in North Amarillo also remains under investigation. 29-year-old Lance Hoser was dropped out of a red SUV at 3rd and Bryan, shot and badly beaten with his hands and feet bound. He died shortly after officers arrived at the scene. Police say they have a lead on a suspect but are not releasing any descriptions. And no arrests have been made in a homicide that happened earlier the same day. Early Monday morning, officers reported to a call at Las Chacalosas nightclub where they found the body of Lamberto Cifuentes. Preliminary autopsy results showed he died of blunt force trauma. Anyone with information on either of these crimes should call the Special Crimes Unit at 378-9468.
And officers were called to a shooting right across the street from that very same nightclub this evening. But as News Channel 10's Leslie Aguilar joins us to explain, there will be no criminal investigation there. Leslie.
Well, right now, police are investigating this incident as a public accident case, though 2 people were sent to the hospital. It happened just after 6 at Irwin's Pawn Shop on 10th Street, right across from the Las Chacalosas nightclub. Police say 1 round was accidentally fired. 2 people were taken to the hospital with minor injuries. And Jeff Tormey, Irwin Pawn Shop's attorney, says the gun was fired by a Glock handgun belonging to a store employee. He says the gun fell to the ground and went off as the employee tried to pick it back up.
It's not unusual. This is a pawn shop. They deal in a lot of gold and jewelry and firearms, and it's not unusual for those kinds of establishments here in town to have their employees armed.
Tormey says the bullet fragmented into several pieces when it hit the ground, hitting 2 or 3 people. Only 2 were transported to the hospital. Police say no criminal charges are likely to be filed. Reporting live in the News Center, Leslie Aguilar, News Channel 10.
Thanks, Leslie. Despite a brief tornado warning in Curry County, it's been a much quieter evening for storms in our region.
Here with our first look at if any areas are seeing rain tonight is Chief Meteorologist Doppler Dave Oliver in the Storm Track Center. Dave.
Well, not right now. Things are pretty quiet. In fact, much of the area has been removed from the severe weather watch area. Let's take a look at that graphically. And as we zero in on this, you'll see that, well, the severe thunderstorm watch continues across parts of Kansas and Oklahoma, including Ellis County, but most of the Texas counties have been dropped off from that watch area. Now, we did have that brief storm, as we mentioned, out in New Mexico, out around Clovis and Portales, but that dissipated rather quickly. Now, really, all we're tracking is big cluster storms moving down through central Kansas. Now, there's still the possibility that we might see some development along that western edge that kind of eats into our eastern counties sometime overnight, but even that is not a sure deal. So we're just going to kind of monitor that eastern zone for maybe some late night storms. Elsewhere, clear. We're dropping down to the upper 70s. Should be a pretty mild night. Nice morning when we wake up. Over the next couple of evenings, we still have that flow coming off the mountains. So tomorrow and Saturday, we'll kind of refocus our attention back to the west and attract some evening storms into the area. So more on that. We'll kind of recap tonight's severe weather coming up. Let's send it back to news.
Thanks, Dave. Heavy rains last night brought much needed moisture to the Panhandle, but also high winds and hail came along with it and had their fair share of damage. News Channel 10's Jeff Stebbins is live in the studio with which parts of the area took the brunt of the storm.
People all around the Panhandle were bracing for potentially severe weather last night, but most of it just saw rain showers. But a few area towns endured strong winds and hailstorms that downed power lines and flooded streets. When last night's storm system moved over the Panhandle, some of the strongest parts passed over Sanford, Fritch, and Borger.
We got some rain and wind here in Amarillo. Had some issues here in Amarillo, but primarily our biggest problems were in the Borger area, not in the city of Borger itself, but in the area around Borger and over toward the lake.
And while the storm didn't do much major damage, it did have XL Energy crews working overnight after it took out 24 power poles near Sanford.
For the Borger area, the worst is out in the Buena Vista area, which we saw lots of down fences, broken power lines, carports were ended up in neighbors' yards, and a lot of those type of wind damage.
And this month's unseasonably active storms have Panhandle residents keeping a close eye on the weather.
Customers need to be a little more aware that we're having this mini storm season stuff we normally would see in May and June. So we've got folks ready to roll.
And the city of Borger tells me there were no serious injuries reported in last night's storm. Reporting live in the studio, Jeff Stebbins, News Channel 10.
Well, you may think certain offers online sound a little too good to be true.
And in the case of some fake deals affecting area residents, you'd be absolutely right. We'll tell you what you need to watch out for coming up on the News at 10 on News Channel 10.